Imagine standing in a grand hall, surrounded by wealth, power, and the illusion of control. Everything seems untouchable, untarnished, as if fate itself bows to your commands. But what if I told you that even the most powerful can face consequences they never imagined? That even arrogance and cruelty can be met with a force far beyond the understanding of the human mind? Today you are about to hear a story that will shake that belief to its core. A story of a baron who laughed at a dying man's final words, only to be struck by a fate he could never escape. This isn't just another tale of cruelty or punishment. This is a chilling reminder of the hidden laws that govern life, the unseen balance that watches over all actions, and the consequences that often arrive when we least expect them. In this video you will discover how one person's suffering and bravery left a mark that even the highest walls of privilege could not contain. You will learn the startling truth about how arrogance blinds us, how dismissing the powerless can become our undoing, and how a single moment of mockery can ripple through time with consequences far beyond imagination. Picture it: a man stripped of his freedom, his life spent in toil and pain, lying on the edge of death. In his final moments, he speaks words that most would dismiss as desperate or meaningless. But these were no ordinary words. They were a curse, a declaration that the injustice he endured would not go unanswered. And standing before him, a figure of unimaginable wealth and authority laughs. He scoffs at the notion that a powerless man could wield any real power over him. He laughs because he believes himself untouchable. He laughs because he cannot imagine that a single dying breath could hold weight. Yet as we dive deeper into this story, you will see that laughter, arrogance, and cruelty are fragile shields against forces far greater than ourselves. You will witness how the echoes of a final curse set in motion a chain of events so extraordinary that it changed everything for the man who believed he controlled the world. The lessons here are powerful and timeless. Every action has consequences, every word carries energy, and every life, even one that seems insignificant, holds the potential to alter destiny. By the end of this video, you won't just know what happened to the baron, you will understand why it matters to you. You'll see how patterns of power, arrogance, and hidden justice can unfold in ways history rarely allows us to predict. You'll be reminded that respect, humility, and awareness of the unseen can protect us in ways we often overlook. And most importantly, you'll carry with you the haunting but enlightening truth: no matter how high we rise, no act of cruelty goes entirely unseen, and no laughter at the suffering of others remains without consequence. So stay with me as we uncover every shocking twist, every moment of suspense, and the remarkable lesson embedded in a story that proves one thing above all: the universe has a way of balancing the scales, often when we least expect it. What happened to the baron will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, justice, and the unseen forces that shape our lives. Before we talk about the shocking events that would follow, we need to understand the man at the center of this story. He was a baron, a figure whose wealth was unmatched and whose influence reached far beyond the walls of his estate. People whispered his name in fear and respect, knowing that a single decision from him could change the course of their lives. His power was not just financial, it was a command over people, over resources, and over the very rules of the land he controlled. To him, authority was natural, and obedience was expected without question. Before we talk about the curse that would haunt him, we must picture the life he led. Imagine grand halls filled with opulent furniture, walls adorned with fine art, and windows that looked out onto endless gardens. Every luxury was at his fingertips, every desire satisfied by servants who moved quietly through the shadows of his estate. But it was not just the material wealth that defined him, it was the control he wielded over everyone around him. His word was law, his approval a prize, and his anger a warning that could ruin lives. Those who crossed him knew that consequences were swift and often merciless. Before we talk about the moment of arrogance that would seal his fate, consider his reputation. He was feared not only for what he could take, but for what he could demand. His status gave him confidence, a certainty that the world itself was designed to bend to his will. Meetings, decisions, and judgments were all conducted with the weight of his authority pressing down. Others deferred, sometimes out of respect, often out of fear. Even those closest to him felt the distance created by his power, a distance that isolated him from the humanity of the people he ruled over. Before we talk about the story's turning point, it's important to understand how privilege shaped his view of the world. He had grown up surrounded by wealth, taught that money and title were the ultimate measures of a person. To the baron, the struggles of the powerless were invisible, their suffering a distant echo that did not concern him. This sense of superiority made him dismissive of warnings, blind to danger, and confident that no curse, no threat, could ever reach him. Privilege had created a bubble of invincibility around him, and he lived inside it with complete certainty. Before we talk about what would change everything, remember the kind of man he was: feared, wealthy and untouchable in his own eyes. He walked through his estate with the air of someone who owned not just land and wealth, but the very fate of those around him. His control was absolute, his status unchallenged, and his sense of security unshakable. The world moved according to his rules, and in his mind nothing could ever alter that. Before we talk about the curse that would turn his life upside down, keep this image in mind: a man who had everything, yet understood nothing of humility, compassion, or the unseen forces that shaped destiny. This was the Baron, a figure whose arrogance and privilege set the stage for a story that would prove that no power, no matter how great, can stand against the consequences of cruelty. Before we talk about the Baron's story, we need to understand the harsh world in which it unfolded. The estate he ruled was not just a place of wealth and luxury for him, it was a place of suffering for those who lived under his command. The men and women who served him were bound by chains of labor, not just in the physical sense, but by a system that denied them freedom, dignity, and basic human rights. Each day for them was a battle for survival, a struggle that began long before the sun rose and continued until the stars appeared in the night sky. Before we talk about the moments that led to the Baron's downfall, picture the fields and the workhouses. Slaves were tasked with endless labor, from tending crops under scorching heat, to performing exhausting chores inside the grand halls of the estate. Their bodies were pushed to the limits, muscles straining and skin blistered, while their spirits endured constant wear and tear. There was little rest, little relief, and no acknowledgement of the human cost of their toil. Every task, no matter how grueling, had to be completed, and failure or delay often met with punishment. Before we talk about the turning point in this story, it's important to see how the daily life of a slave was controlled. Hours were dictated not by the rhythms of nature or human need, but by the demands of those in power. There was no room for fatigue, for illness or for personal need. Food was often scarce and inadequate, clothing meager and shelter barely sufficient to protect from the elements. They lived in constant fear of punishment, knowing that the consequences of disobedience or perceived slowness could be brutal. The fear of physical harm, the threat of humiliation, and the impossibility of escape were constant companions. Before we talk about the events that would shock the Baron, consider the psychological weight of this world. Slaves were stripped of autonomy, treated as property rather than people, and forced to endure conditions that broke the body and tested the soul. Their labor fueled the comfort and luxury of the estate, yet they themselves remained unseen in the grand narrative of wealth. The work was relentless, with little hope of reprieve, and the mental strain of living under constant control weighed as heavily as the physical strain of labor. Before we talk about the moment the curse was uttered, remember the environment in which it arose. Slaves were not just working under harsh conditions, they were enduring a system designed to break them, to suppress any spark of resistance or hope. Yet even in this world of cruelty, moments of courage and defiance could appear, tiny sparks of humanity that refused to be extinguished. It was from this place of suffering and oppression that the final words of the dying slave would emerge, words that carried the weight of pain, injustice, and the unyielding truth of his existence. Before we talk about the Baron's reaction, keep in mind the relentless grind of this world. Slaves labored from dawn until nightfall, their days measured in sweat, exhaustion, and obedience. They were invisible to the very system that relied upon them, yet their presence and perseverance formed the backbone of the wealth and power that figures like the Baron took for granted. This was the cruel reality of slavery, a world where human life was secondary to control, and suffering was an expected cost of profit and privilege. Before we talk about the moment that would change everything, we need to meet the man at the heart of this story, the dying slave. He was not just another face in the fields or halls of the estate. He was a man who had lived a life filled with suffering, hardship, and injustice. From the earliest days he could remember, His existence had been defined by the demands of others, by a system that treated him as property rather than a human being. Every day had been a struggle, every moment a test of endurance, yet somehow through all the pain, he had maintained a spark of resilience that refused to be extinguished. Before we talk about the events that would soon unfold, consider the mistreatment he endured. He had been forced into backbreaking labor, his body pushed beyond its limits under the blazing sun and biting cold. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions, and punishment was ever present for even the smallest mistake. He had been mocked, belittled, and denied the most basic dignity that every person deserves. Yet despite the cruelty, he carried himself with a quiet strength. He did not let the harshness of his world strip him of the humanity that connected him to life itself, to hope, and to the belief that justice, in some form, could exist. Before we talk about his final moments, it is important to see how he retained his humanity in a world designed to crush it. He showed compassion to others, even when kindness was rarely returned. He understood the suffering of those around him, offering small gestures of support when he could, and maintaining a sense of dignity that the system tried so desperately to erase. Though beaten down by years of hardship, he did not lose the ability to feel, to think, or to recognize the moral weight of right and wrong. His soul remained intact, a silent rebellion against the dehumanizing forces that sought to define his existence. Before we talk about the curse he would utter, imagine the inner life of this man. Behind weary eyes and a body scarred from labor and punishment, there was clarity and awareness. He saw the world as it truly was, the imbalance of power, the cruelty of those who wielded authority without conscience, and the stark reality that justice often seemed distant. Yet he also held a vision of fairness, of consequences for those who inflicted pain, and it was this vision that gave him courage in his final moments. He had been wronged, yet he did not succumb to bitterness alone. He channeled his suffering into a declaration, a statement that would carry weight far beyond his own life. Before we talk about the scene that would shock everyone, it is vital to recognize that this man, despite everything, remained profoundly human. He was not a figure of anger alone, nor of revenge for its own sake. He was a man whose experiences had forged wisdom, whose pain had sharpened his perception, and whose humanity shone brightest when the world around him sought to extinguish it. The dying slave was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a spirit that could endure unimaginable suffering yet still speak with purpose, clarity, and a sense of justice that no amount of cruelty could erase. Before we talk about the Baron's reaction to what was to come, remember this: the dying slave was a man who had suffered deeply, yet retained the essence of who he was. In his final moments, that humanity would become the instrument of a message so powerful that it would leave an indelible mark on the life of the man who had thought himself untouchable. Before we talk about the moment that would seal the fate of the Baron, picture the scene in vivid detail. The air was heavy with tension, a silence that seemed almost unnatural stretching across the estate. The dying slave lay on the hard floor of the workhouse, his body battered from years of relentless labor, his skin marked by scars that told the story of a lifetime of suffering. Each breath was labored, each movement a struggle, yet his eyes burned with an intensity that could not be ignored. Around him the world carried on as if nothing were happening, but in that small dimly lit space, something extraordinary was about to occur. Before we talk about the words that would change everything, imagine the weight of the moment. The Baron stood nearby, observing with a mixture of indifference and amusement, believing himself untouchable, secure in the illusion that the suffering of another man could have no bearing on his own life. The dying slave, knowing the end was near, raised his voice one last time. It was not a plea or a cry for mercy, it was a declaration, a statement that demanded to be heard, carrying the force of a lifetime of injustice. Every word resonated with the pain of years of oppression, yet carried a clarity and purpose that cut through the arrogance surrounding him. Before we talk about the impact of the curse, consider its power. These were not ordinary words, they were a form of justice, a reckoning spoken aloud at the edge of life. He cursed the Baron not out of spite alone, but as a response to the relentless cruelty, the disregard for human dignity, and the endless suffering imposed upon him and countless others. His words were sharp, precise, and heavy with meaning. They invoked consequences, not through magic or superstition, but through the undeniable weight of truth, a truth the Baron had ignored for so long. Before we talk about how the Baron reacted, picture the intensity of the final declaration. The slave spoke of retribution, of balance, of a justice that would not be denied. His voice carried the certainty of someone who had suffered enough, who had seen the harm inflicted, and knew that nothing in this world could erase it. Each syllable was a reminder of the power that resides even in those who seem powerless, a testament to the idea that cruelty is never without consequence. The curse was not shouted in anger, it was delivered with solemnity, with conviction, and with an unshakable belief that the universe, or fate itself, would respond. Before we talk about the Baron's fateful reaction, feel the tension in the room. The dying slave, fragile yet formidable, commanded attention not with force but with presence. The weight of his words hung in the air, pressing against the walls, echoing in the minds of all who witnessed them. Even in weakness, he possessed a power that the Baron could not comprehend, a power born of suffering, of truth, and of unwavering humanity. Before we talk about the immediate aftermath, remember this: the curse was not simply a threat, nor a bitter outcry. It was a statement of justice, a final reckoning, spoken by a man who had been denied everything. In that moment the dying slave became more than a victim, he became an instrument of balance, a force that would challenge the arrogance of the Baron, and set in motion events that no one could have predicted. Before we talk about what would come next, we need to see the Baron in that moment, standing over the dying slave and hearing words that would later echo through history. He was a man so certain of his own power, so convinced of his invincibility, that the very idea of consequences seemed laughable. The curse, spoken with the weight of suffering and the clarity of truth, reached his ears, but instead of reflection or fear, it sparked amusement. He laughed, a deep booming laugh that filled the room and drowned out the dying man's final breaths. Before we talk about the ripple effects of that laughter, imagine the mindset of someone who sees themselves as untouchable. The Baron had spent his life in privilege, surrounded by wealth and authority, shielded from the realities that shaped the lives of those beneath him. To him the suffering of a slave was not a moral issue, it was routine, expected and inconsequential. The notion that a few words spoken by a dying man could carry any weight over his fate was absurd. That laughter was not just amusement, it was the ultimate expression of arrogance, a public declaration that he believed himself beyond the reach of justice or retribution. Before we talk about the consequences that would follow, feel the audacity in his mockery. He tilted his head, smiled with contempt, and shook his shoulders as though the curse were no more than a silly whisper in the wind. The room seemed to tremble with the force of his confidence, yet it also held a strange tension, an unease that even the Baron did not fully perceive. Those who witnessed the scene may have sensed something ominous in the laughter, a crack in the armor of certainty, but none could predict what was coming. Before we talk about the events that would unfold, consider how he dismissed the very concept of power held by someone considered powerless. The Baron's mockery was thorough. He repeated the words silently to himself, chuckling at the absurdity, as if reinforcing the belief that life operated entirely on his terms. The curse to him was a joke, a desperate plea from a man with no influence, no resources, and no future. He could not imagine that the forces of consequence, karma, or fate could be summoned from the voice of someone he deemed insignificant. Before we talk about the turning point, understand the danger in such arrogance. Laughter at injustice is a signal of blindness, a refusal to acknowledge that even the weakest hold potential power, even in their final moments. The Baron's amusement was total, complete, and in that very moment, it sealed his detachment from the reality of what was being spoken. Every chuckle, every dismissive glance, reinforced the gap between his perception and the truth, a truth that would eventually reach him in a way he could never ignore. Before we talk about what happened next, remember this: his laughter was not merely amusement, it was a statement of disbelief, a public rejection of accountability, and a reflection of a man who had never truly encountered the consequences of cruelty. In that room the Baron felt untouchable, impervious and invincible. Yet that very confidence would become the prelude to an outcome that would defy his understanding, proving that no amount of wealth, power, or arrogance can shield someone from the repercussions of ignoring justice. In the end, this story reminds us of a timeless truth: power and arrogance, no matter how absolute they seem, can never stand against justice and dignity. Cruelty, even when it appears unchecked, carries consequences, sometimes hidden, sometimes delayed, but always inevitable. And the words we speak, the intentions behind them, can carry weight far beyond what we imagine, even at the very edge of life. The dying slave's final words became more than a curse. They became a force that challenged arrogance, demanded respect, and proved that no act of cruelty goes unnoticed. If this story left you thinking, reflecting, or even questioning the nature of justice, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more stories that reveal the power of truth, the consequences of our actions, and the lessons hidden in history.